Thank you for tuning in. You're watching the Daily Report for Wednesday, March 16th. A record high in COVID-19 infections today here on the local front, with authorities reporting more than 400,000 new cases over a span of 24 hours. I have Kwon standing by with the latest. So do start us off.
Sunny, another milestone caseload has been reported here in the country. Now, Wednesday's caseload stands at 400,741. Now, people who might be in confusion, who have checked the number the day before at 9 p.m. as the number stood at above 440,000, but officials say this has been attributed to a reporting of some cases that have been double counted. Now, meanwhile, we have a rise in both domestic transmissions as well as imported cases this Wednesday. And if we go over to our graph, this is a rise by around 38,000 cases from the day before. And compared to last Wednesday, it is an on-week surge by around 58,000 infections. And with that, the average number of daily cases in the past 7 days stands at above 340,000. And moving on to our map, here in the capital region, first off, there's been a record high in the capital's whole with over 81,000 infections, a decline actually in Gyeonggi-do province, while Incheon has accumulated over 500,000 cases as of this Wednesday, and also record highs in other places such as Jeju-do Island, also with over 7,600 infections in the past day. And with that, Korea has accumulated 7.6 million infections, and the death toll stands at 11,052, with 164 people having lost their lives in the past day. And the number of patients in severe or critical condition is still on the rise, with an all-time high reported this Wednesday at 1,244. Moving on to our vaccination figures now, we've got a little over 2,400 and more than 3,300 people who got their first or second COVID-19 vaccine dose the day before. And we've got a little under 32,000 people who've been administered with their booster shot, and that's now 62.7% of the nation's population. Going on to the global figures, 462 million people in the world now have been infected with COVID-19, and the death toll stands at 6 million and more than 73,700, with a little over 6,100 people who lost their lives in the past 24 hours as of noon Korea time. And most cases are now occurring in places like Korea, Vietnam, and Germany, which has just surpassed the total caseload of Russia in the past day, with more than 220,000 cases reported in the past day. And those are the general updates I have for now, but I'll see you back in a bit. Sunny?
Right, so thank you for the global tallies. Health authorities here remain undeterred in their plans to pave a path out of the pandemic and into an endemic phase of COVID-19, despite the unsettling tallies, of course. I have Han Sung-woo joining me now with details on that. Sung-woo, good to see you again.
Good to see you.
Right, so officials here are subtly but tangibly choosing to address COVID-19 as an endemic disease, Sung-woo.
That's right, Sunny. Like we heard from authorities yesterday, our COVID-19 fatality rate has been sitting below 0.1% for the past 4 weeks now, which explains why more and more people are now treating the virus as an endemic threat. These views were echoed by Prime Minister Kim Boo-kyum this morning, actually. Take a listen.
Quarantine authorities should discuss with the medical community how COVID-19 as an infectious disease can be reclassified from its current grade of level 1 so that the virus can be medically dealt with in an ordinary setting.
He's essentially saying the same thing, that COVID-19 should no longer be treated as a notable exception compared to other infectious diseases like the seasonal flu. Kim still emphasized the need to get vaccinated, but at the same time assured the public that the peak of the ongoing Omicron surge would soon come to an end. As such, health authorities are increasingly concentrating their time and efforts on treating patients who really need it. I'm talking about the most vulnerable. Like Soa laid out yesterday, those with underlying conditions in their 50s have now been excluded from the so-called intensive management bracket, so that healthcare workers can focus on patients in their 60s and those with weak immunity. Also starting today, people hospitalized for different reasons who contract the virus but show mild or no symptoms will, in principle, continue to receive care in their standard beds not in isolation.
Moving forward, Sangwoo, do you suppose this shift in perception with regard to COVID-19 will perhaps weigh in on the government's upcoming decision with regard to the fate of our COVID-19 restrictions?
I'd say that's highly likely, Sunny. That announcement will be made on Friday, just a couple of days before the current social distancing scheme, which limits private gatherings to 6 people max and business hours to 11 p.m. expires this coming Sunday. The country is considering several options for its next set of guidelines coming into effect on Monday, including 1, maintaining the current rules, 2, raising the cap on gatherings to 8 and extending business hours to midnight, or 3, even completely lifting the restrictions altogether. But before authorities make a final decision, though, they'll be holding in-depth discussions with various stakeholders, including related ministries, local governments, and of course, healthcare workers and business owners who have borne the brunt of the pandemic.
Right, so I suppose we'll just have to wait and see then. Thank you for now, but do stay for more talks.
I'll be right here.
Right, up next, we share with you the latest government assessment with regard to our Omicron wave. Right, so?
Right, and more specific, the peak, and also Prime Minister Kim Boo-kyum in the earlier briefing that Sangwoo mentioned before, as well as officials are citing expert forecasts that currently predict our peak will come at around the 23rd of this month, which would be around next Wednesday. In terms of the number of cases, an official said during the peak, the weekly average in daily cases will be at around 370,000.
We must keep in mind that our daily tallies are influenced by the weekend factor, which can create a difference of around 30% between the figures we see on a given weekday. Therefore, individual daily tallies could range from anywhere between the low 300,000s to the mid 400,000s.
And Son asked for a little bit of more patience from the public, saying we can consider the Omicron wave as the last challenge of this pandemic before we can return to our daily lives, unless a new variant emerges.
Meanwhile, so on the treatment front, where does our medical capacity stand with regard to the rising number of caseloads here?
Right, along with the increasing numbers of daily infections, the number of patients who need hospital care is also on the rise, according to officials this Wednesday. But still, there are no patients that have to wait longer than a day to get assigned a hospital bed. The ICU occupancy rate nationwide stands at 64.2% as of this Wednesday. However, the situation looks more dire in some parts of the country. Over 80% of hospital beds are in use in Busan and Daegu, for instance, and more than 90% in Gangwon-do province. As for people recovering at home, the number has increased by around 430,000 to some 1.77 million as of this Wednesday. Around 268,000 of those are subject to intensive management, and this number is nearing the maximum limit with the government planning to expand capacity to manage up to 326,000 in this group. Officials also announced the expansion of special hospitals to treat children infected with COVID-19. A total of 78 hospitals have been designated for children, including 2 each for the first time in the capitals Seoul and Daegu. With that, more than 3,000 hospital beds for children have been made available. And this is needed because since the Omicron wave, 5 children aged below 10 have lost their lives, and 6 are said to be currently in severe or critical condition.
Right, and we pray for their quick recovery. Speaking of children, so I hear the Education Ministry has shared its latest analysis on the effectiveness of COVID-19 screening at schools.
Exactly, because it's been around 2 weeks now since students returned to school for the new semester, and the ministry assessed the self-test kits that students are using twice a week, although it is not mandatory. They say that this process has proven to be effective, which is why they will continue using them for the time being, as the Omicron peak has yet to arrive.
We will maintain our current protocol of testing students twice a week until the 2nd week of April, and once a week thereafter, in principle, while allowing regional educational authorities to exercise more flexibility depending on the COVID-19 situation in their respective jurisdictions.
Tong said that the government had traced results of the self-testing application that students used, as well as follow-up PCR test results in cases of positive self-test results. In an analysis based on 4.3 million students and school faculty members who conducted some 8.6 million self-tests, more than 181,000 tested positive, and over 161,000 of them were confirmed through PCR tests, which translates into an 89% early detection rate through the preemptive testing method. Meanwhile, Education Minister Yoon Suk-yeol was said to be inspecting PCR test sites at schools nationwide this Wednesday, and that because there are some dozens of schools that have these temporary test sites so that it's more convenient to test these students in a faster manner, for instance, when a cluster infection occurs at a school. And also in regards to the vaccinations for children aged 5 to 11, which is expected to kick off at the end of this month, the Education Ministry said it will include this age group in its adverse response recovery support that it had been providing to teenagers before.
Right, that is good to know. Staying with vaccination, so let's now include Song-woo in our talk. Song-woo, I believe Korean drug maker SK Bioscience is seeking emergency use authorization from the UK for its vaccine candidate. Tell us about that.
That's correct, Sonia. GBP510 is the name of the substance, and the drug maker revealed today that it had submitted an application for marketing authorization through an expedited rolling review to Britain's Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency, or MHRA, with the goal of eventually attaining emergency use approval. The rolling review refers to a system designed to simplify the long process it takes to evaluate a newly developed medicine's efficacy, safety, and quality. GBP510 is South Korea's first homegrown vaccine candidate to enter the last phase of clinical trials, and SK Bioscience aims to produce an interim result of its trials by the end of the first quarter of this year. Before seeking emergency authorization from South Korean drug authorities and marketing authorization from the European Medicines Agency, the EMA, in the first half of 2022. Yeonhap News reports the company is also eyeing to commercialize it through the COVAX facility after receiving pre-qualifications from the WHO, the World Health Organization, by the end of the year.
Right. Meanwhile, so Pfizer is seeking approval for a second booster dose for the elderly, I hear. Tell us about that.
Right. Pfizer and BioNTech announced on Tuesday local time that they asked for authorization from the US FDA for a fourth dose or a second booster shot for people that are aged 65 and above, in a bid to protect those at highest risk of severe illness and death from the virus. Pfizer referred to data from Israel, which showed COVID-19 cases were 2 times lower and the rate of severe illness was 4 times lower among people who received a second booster shot compared to those who just got one. The second booster was given at least 4 months after the initial booster. Now, meanwhile, currently in the U.S., one booster shot is available for anyone aged 12 and older and 5 months after they receive their second shot.
I see. All right, so as always, thank you very much for the updates. And Song-woo, thank you as well. See you on Thursday.
Thank you.
Topping our headlines at this hour is news about a failed projectile launch by North Korea earlier on this Wednesday. According to South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff, North Korea fired a projectile at around 9:30 this morning, but it appeared to have failed right after its launch. The projectile was fired from an airfield in the Sunan area located in the North Korean capital of Pyongyang, and it exploded at some point below an altitude of 20 kilometers. Relevant authorities here are working with their U.S. counterparts on further analysis. Meanwhile, the two Koreas may be in for a turbulent ride under the new administration here in South Korea. President-elect Yoon Suk-yeol has spoken about the need for a tough stance against North Korea's blatant show of military might. Our Kim Dami has more on what may lie ahead with regard to inter-Korean affairs.
A bumpy road ahead is expected for the peace process on the Korean Peninsula under the incoming conservative government of Yoon Suk-yeol. While pursuing inter-Korean dialogue like his predecessor, the president-elect said in his campaign that he will deal sternly with North Korea.
북한의 불법적이고 불합리한 행동에 대해서는 원칙에 따라 단호하게 대처하되 남북 대화의 문은 언제든 열어둘 것입니다.
In sharp contrast to the current Moon administration, Yoon has long expressed his will to secure peace through force rather than through words alone, especially when it comes to Pyongyang's military threat.
Yoon could strengthen deterrence and strategic assets through South Korea-US joint military drills and push for increased US military deterrence capability on the Korean Peninsula.
Yoon has made clear he will only sit down with the leader Kim Jong-un for talks when the North's complete and verifiable denuclearization is guaranteed. But experts say Yoon will likely launch his own version of the peace process rather than solely taking a tough stance against the reclusive regime.
Yoon has warned of strict policies against the North, but nuclear issues cannot be solved like that. There should be talks and negotiations. So activating Yoon's own peace process will be his biggest task.
With less than 2 months until the Yoon administration kicks off, the president-elect has a lot on his plate. But with the crisis in Ukraine highlighting the importance of emerging and traditional security, experts say it is inevitable that Yoon will move inter-Korean relations higher up on his agenda. 김다미, Arirang News.
Over in Eastern Europe, amid the shocking devastation, losses of lives and tragic displacement of civilians, the glimmer of hope, perhaps, is the attempt at dialogue between delegates from Russia and Ukraine. Arirang reports.
A fourth round of diplomatic talks between Russia and Ukraine ended on Tuesday local time, following a pause the previous day. A senior Ukrainian official said talks with Russia on ending the war were very difficult due to fundamental differences, adding there is certainly room for compromise. The official said that negotiations will continue on Wednesday. Both sides agreed to a technical pause on Monday during a fourth round of talks, citing the need for additional work and clarification of individual definitions and working subgroups. Included on the agenda for the resumed meeting was a possible ceasefire and the withdrawal of Russian troops from Ukrainian territory. Meanwhile, Russia imposed sanctions on U.S. President Joe Biden, Secretary of State Antony Blinken, and the country's other top officials. The move bans them from entering Russia and is a response to U.S. measures against Russian President Vladimir Putin. But Russia's foreign ministry said official contact with the sanctioned individuals would remain open and official relations maintained. However, legislators, businessmen, or experts could be added to the list in the future. The European Union also launched additional sanctions against Russia on Tuesday. They included bans on Russian energy sector investments, luxury goods exports to Moscow, and imports of steel products from Russia. The freezing of assets of more business leaders who support Russia will also be included in the measures. The UK government also said the country will deny Russia and Belarus most favored nation status, which will lead to an additional 35% import tariff on the two countries. Meanwhile, according to the UN, the war has forced more than 3 million people to flee the country to search for safety. The agency added they estimate the number of civilians fleeing could eventually go up to 4 or 5 million. It's said the war is creating a child refugee almost every second, with some 1.5 million children now joining the exodus from Ukraine. The UN also warned that as 9 out of 10 of those fleeing are women and children, human trafficking remains as a very grave issue. Lee Dae-hyun, Arirang News.
Back on the local front, pundits are raising alarm about the possibility of stagflation amid the prolonged pandemic and rampant repercussions of Russia's war in Ukraine. Here's Yoon Jin.
Just this month, South Korean exports increased by nearly 15% from a year ago. Exports have continued to see a growing trend, but concerns remain over increases in the price of imports, which now exceeds exports, resulting in a trade balance deficit. The biggest contributor has been the soaring prices of crude oil, gas, and other such petroleum products. This month marks the 5th month that consumer prices have risen by more than 3%. A predicted rise to 4% by the end of the month would bring the level to its highest in 11 years. The impact of the Omicron variant spreading unabated nationwide is raising concerns over stagflation. But the Bank of Korea says the economy is on track for recovery and that it is not yet considering this possibility.
There has been great inflation pressure, but the global economy is showing a steady recovery, mainly due to the strong recovery of the US economy. I don't think we'll be seeing an economic downturn.
That does not mean all is well. Global oil prices continue to skyrocket, and this has significant impact on the overall domestic economy, which relies heavily on imports of crude oil. Some analysts say that we are now entering what's being called slowflation, where we see high inflation while there is still slow economic growth, a stage seen before stagflation.
I see the greatest possibility of slowflation, where growth is slowed even further, and we can't rule out the possibility of stagflation because of the uncertainty surrounding the Ukraine crisis and global oil prices.
Stagflation and slowflation are both high risks to the economy because they are difficult to respond to with policy changes such as adjusting the benchmark interest rate. Rising prices and slow economic recovery are expected to be the biggest challenge for the new administration when it takes office in May. 이은진, Arirang News.
On a positive note, employment numbers expanded further last month amid greater job opportunities within the healthcare sector. Our Kim Sang-min has more on these findings.
South Korea has added over 1 million jobs on year for the second straight month in February, mainly on the back of low jobs figures the previous year and the ongoing economic recovery. Statistics Korea said on Wednesday that the number of workers in the country came to some 27.4 million last month, up 1.04 million from a year earlier. With that, the country extended its on-year job growth for the 12th straight month. February's figures were also an increase of more than 400,000 jobs compared to January and were the largest on-year increase for any February in 22 years. The employment rate for people aged 15 and older rose 2 percentage points last month to a record high of almost 61%. This shows a recovery following the slump in jobs figures last year when the number of employed people for February 2021 fell more than 470,000 amid the pandemic. Statistics Korea attributed the ongoing improvement to more businesses going digital to survive the pandemic, as well as robust exports. By sector, healthcare continues to see the highest job growth with over 250,000 more jobs on year. Omicron has taken its toll on the retail sector, though, with 47,000 fewer workers in the sector in February compared to the previous year. February could be the last month of bumper figures. The impact of the base effect will start to wane from March, as that's when the country started reporting job growth again, slowly starting to recover from the fallout of COVID-19. Kim Sang-min, Arirang News.
The pandemic appears to have altered consumption and investment patterns here in the country. Do take a look.
The prolonged pandemic has changed the consumption trends, and one of the most interesting changes is that sales at department stores have risen significantly.
According to the distribution industry, sales at major department stores increased significantly last year from 2020, along with a surging number of stores with annual sales exceeding 1 trillion won. Department stores were considered as the declining industry just 3 to 4 years ago with a boom in online shopping, but things have changed since the pandemic.
코로나로 인해서 소비 심리가 굉장히 좀 위축되어 있었는데 사실 이게 장기화되면서 고객분들도 좀 나오시고 싶어 하시는 것 같고요. 체험 요소들이 확대가 되면서 고객분들이 머무는 시간도 좀 길어지고 자연스럽게 매출로 연결이 되고 있는 것 같습니다.
코로나 때문에 이제 밖에 외출을 많이 못 하다 보니까 사실 돈이 이제 조금 모이면은 또 평소보다 이제 조금 갖고 싶었던 걸 좀 사게 되는 그런 소비 패턴이 좀 변한 것 같습니다.
Luxury goods have also played a big role in the department store's good sales performance. Luxury goods accounted for 33% of department store sales in 2021. Compared to the pre-pandemic level, the figure rose 6 percentage points. The frenzy over high-end products has driven young people to obtain products through the so-called up and run. The prolonged pandemic has also resulted in increased speculative consumption. According to the Finance Ministry, domestic lottery sales amounted about $4.7 billion last year, up more than 10% from a year earlier.
1918년에 스페인 독감이 한 2년 전 세계를 휩쓸어서 1억 명 이상 사망한 사건이 있는데요. 스페인 독감 이후에 1920년부터 약 한 7, 8년 정도 전 세계적으로 굉장히 소비 붐이 일어났거든요. 미국을 포함한 전 세계 소비자들이 2년 이상을 약간 어떻게 보면은 굉장한 스트레스를 받았기 때문에 그 이제 보복 소비가 뭐 중산층이나 뭐 고소득층, 저소득층 할 거 없이 보복 소비 심리가 다 만연해 있다 이렇게 보여지고요.
In fact, those in their 20s and 30s jumped into the stock, virtual currency, and real estate markets after COVID-19 and led the price to rise. They saw the stock market plunging and rebounding during the pandemic. Also, low interest rates have prompted young people to have the perception that savings are no longer a good means to manage money.
MZ 세대는 이런 이제 주식 투자라든지 그 다음에 어떤 가상화폐라든지 새로운 어떤 신종 투자를 하지 않으면 미래가 없다는 걸 알기 때문에 왜냐면은 이제 정상적인 방법으로 뭐 회사를 다녀서 30년 회사 다닌 어떤 뭐 월급으로 뭐 주택을 산다거나 투자할 거는 도저히 기대할 수 없잖아요.
Recently, new types of investment where people can invest with only a modest amount of money have gained much popularity, particularly among young people.
The pandemic has also changed the way we are investing. In particular, those in their 20s and 30s are turning their eyes to new types of investment, such as cryptocurrencies and NFTs.
NFTs, which provide exclusive ownership on the blockchain, drew much attention in the financial market amid growing uncertainties due to the pandemic. This exhibition displays a variety of NFT works sold online.
간편히 집에서 작품을 구매할 수 있다는 접근성과 투자 목적으로 관심을 가지시기도 하는 것 같습니다.
처음에는 잘 몰라서 이렇게 이런 식으로 귀여운 그림들, 이게 NFT 요새 대세인 NFT라고 하더라 해서 이런 귀여운 그림들을 이제 나의 소유로 한번 가질 수 있구나라는 느낌으로 구매를 했는데요. 투자 용도로도 몇백 개 들고 있기는 합니다. 네.
In fact, the global trading volume of NFTs saw a 10-fold increase from $1.2 billion at the beginning of last year to $11.9 billion in the fourth quarter of last year.
Experts are saying that the pent-up demand and the investment boom led by the pandemic are expected to continue for the time being. This has been 신새벽.
To ease or not to ease? That seems to be the question amid the presence of Omicron, as health care experts largely agree it is milder than its earlier counterparts. But just how mild is it, and will it be the last variant of concern? To answer these questions and more, I have Professor Yoo Byung-wook from Suncheon University. Professor Yoo, it's a pleasure to see you again. I also have Professor Chi-Woon Bang at the University of Michigan live on the line. Professor Bang, welcome to the studio. Welcome to our show.
Hi, thanks for inviting me back.
Right.
And good to see you again, Sunny.
Right, Professor Bang, it's a pleasure to see you again as well. We'll start here in the studio then. Professor Yu, our daily tally on this Wednesday stands at over 400,000 infections, exceeding earlier estimates by healthcare officials in the country. Is this reality, Professor Yu, a cause for concern, do you think?
Well, I've expected more than 400 or even 500,000 this week. I've expected last week. How? Because, PCR capacity of Korea is 850,000 is the max. Sometimes a little more, but 850,000 is the capacity of the PCR. We can detect it around 30-40% mean. We get it around 0.3. Yes, millions of people, we can catch it. But from the Monday this week, we are accepted professional rapid antigen test together. That's why I simply said last week, yes, probably from the Wednesday or Thursday, we can see sure around 400,000 cases confirmed as COVID-19 positive, even more can be why. Capacities of PCR, if we got it 50%, yes, that time we got it around 400,000 cases confirmed. As plus, now we are accepted as like confirmed, is a professional rapid antigen test is done, so add on. But you know what? Exactly, these days, in my calculated, every day at least 600 to 700,000 people are infected. But we just get it around the 50%. So we are now in the big tunnel, middle of a tunnel. Probably in 10 days, we can see the end of this tunnel to show. But anyway, please don't be surprised. We can get it probably this Thursday or Friday. We can see more than 500,000 cases confirming Korea. But this one is mean not for spreading more. We just know, we just catching to condition what's going on. Only we just catching the cases.
Right, I see. And regardless of the situation here in Korea, Professor Bang, do you believe that the worst of the Omicron wave is over in most other parts of the world?
So that's a great question. Most likely, yes. But we are seeing a slight surge in the prevalence rate of the BA2, so the subvariant of Omicron. And so we'll see. I don't know how intense and the duration of the BA2 surge will be. My guess is it won't be that big. And I guess overall not too worried because overall we're much more prepared at this point because we have a much larger population that's immune due to high vaccination rates, natural immunity, and then we have a lot of other treatment options compared to when this pandemic first began. So most likely the Omicron surge is going to get better, but I do expect a small surge from the BA2 variant to come. But overall, I think we're much better prepared for that surge.
Right. And back on the local front, Professor Yu, there has been a worrying spike in the number of fatalities here in the country. Having said that, how does Korea's case fatality rate amid Omicron compared to that of its international counterparts?
Well, in the case, the fatality rate is we are extremely low. But other countries, they are having counting of fatalities more than 1% close, but Korea is less than 0.1. But you know what? This is kind of statistics saying, but actually we are feeling in the real in the hospital a little different, because now these nearly 200 more cases we have to announce it as like that because of Omicron or COVID-19 complication. In the plus, there are other cases like Omicron can be started, but already 7 or 10 days past it, but still are suffering for the infectious respiratory conditions, and few weeks later, finally turn to be death. That case, how we can count exactly. That's why Omicron, yes, is compared to other variant, it seems to be mild. In the Korean, in the medical service system, we are depends well, but we cannot count it and we cannot judge in this moment because after Omicron waves, but still someone who are suffering, this is because of Omicron variant infection. But the problem is now facilities can kind of full, and the human resources, manpower as medical power is not enough to take care of them. So doctors and the nurses, our medical profession in Korea, we have to decide every day who we have to take care first. So it's kind of ethical issues. So we on the line all the way. So, but anyway, in statistics show Koreans, quarantines and depends well seems to, but we cannot judge in this moment. We have to see after finish this Omicron variant waves.
Right. Meanwhile, Professor Bang, many states over in the US have been rolling back, that is, pandemic-related public health policies, including mask mandates. Do you believe these efforts are in line, perhaps, with the current COVID-19 situation over there in the US?
I think so. We're seeing a dramatic decrease in the incidence rate of, COVID-19, the Omicron variant. I think the masks are not that helpful at this point, so I think it makes sense that we're removing the mask mandates. And again, as I emphasized, we're in such a different position compared to when this pandemic first began. Much better immunity in the population, much more treatment options when patients do contract COVID-19. And so we're just in a better place. And so, again, I don't know. I do think COVID-19 will be with us for a very long time, and it will likely be an endemic virus. But, I don't know if we need to be in this perpetual state of emergency at this point, at least here in the United States, because I do think we're much better prepared. I do think the important question that I don't know the answer to, and I don't know if anyone does, is what will be the next variant. I briefly mentioned the BA2 variant, which is like the little brother of Omicron. So it's a subvariant of Omicron. I do think that will surge a little bit. But again, I don't think it'll be too problematic. But what's after BA2? I don't know. And so that'll be the big question. But again, we're much better prepared. So not as too concerned as I was 2 years ago.
Right, like experts say, there are many questions and very few answers, of course. Professor Bang, have there been any tangible changes, perhaps, in the testing and treating of COVID-19 following the drop in Omicron infections there in the US?
There has, in the sense that during the peak of Omicron, what was happening was we didn't have enough medicines to treat our patients. Medicines like monoclonal antibodies or the oral antivirals from Pfizer and Merck. We were in short supply of these medications, so we would have to triage these patients and only give it to people who are at high risk of developing severe disease. So patients over 65, patients who've had conditions that weaken their immune system, patients who were unvaccinated. These patients would get the priority over these medicines over patients who were more relatively healthy. That has changed because, again, the incidence of Omicron has gone down so much. Now we are in a situation where we have enough medicine for most people who do get COVID-19. So that would be the big change that I'm noticing with this decrease in Omicron. And relevant to your treatment question, we just have a lot more supply now.
Right, well, that is good to know, of course. Meanwhile, Professor, here in Korea, authorities have allowed for COVID-19 to be treated under a regular regimen amid the onslaught of Omicron. What are perhaps the potential merits as well as setbacks of this new shift in treatment strategy?
Because this is only one way to a exit plan. Because you can guess 400,000 cases every day. We can calculate it simply. Probably there are at least 22 pregnant women should be delivered the baby, cesarean or normal delivery as well. Or more, around 30 patients who got a heart attack, they have to be received the proper treatment for prevent of the heart attacks related to death, which means we have to switch for in general world open for the patient with the COVID or doesn't matter what, because a number of patients now, nearly 1.5 million people stayed at home because Omicron quarantine and isolations. But at the same time, that populations can help in something in their health issues, stroke, heart attack, I can tell for delivery something. That time, we have to prepare a certain space. It's using as a general word. But before we use the level D, like astronaut protection, PPE, but like this, we cannot handle it easier. So we need to potentially change the mind and concept. We can, like say, pivot the systems. It's like attend for regular base seasonal flu. We can change the mind. Yes, Omicron, still we are worried about it because it is also kind of COVID-19 virus itself. Still the fatality more than the seasonal flu. But now in Korea, there are no way to another option because more than 2 million people going to be staying in home under this Omicron variant crisis. That's the time we have to be open for who got it Omicron, but who has health issues, not only for respiratory systems issues, and on their own health issues. That's why we have to open that we must have it treated because of number of patients got Omicron variant now.
Right, I see. And back in the US, Professor Pang, under a new COVID-19 response strategy by the Biden administration, Americans will be able to get tested for COVID-19 at pharmacies and, I quote, receive antiviral pills on the spot at no cost if they are infected. What are your thoughts on this initiative?
So that's what needs to happen because this disease, the key is to give these antivirals as early as possible. And so what the Biden administration is trying to do is trying to streamline this whole process so that when you do get a diagnosis, you don't have to call your doctor. You don't have to wait for the prescriptions to be sent to the pharmacy. You get the diagnosis, you can get the treatment on the spot. And I think their policy is trying to implement this very important concept because that's how you can make a big impact on disease severity with Omicron, early treatment. So it's a great idea. I don't know how it's being implemented. There will be a lot of implementation hurdles that they need to overcome. For example, certain drugs like Paxlovid, it interacts with a lot of drugs. So patients who are on a lot of medications because of other illnesses. And by the way, these patients who are on a lot of medications are the people who will benefit the most from these antivirals. You have to be careful because these medications will interact with this drug called Paxlovid. And if you don't have the expertise, there could be some serious drug interactions that can lead to potentially concerning medical events. And so we need to be careful for that. So it's a great concept. I wish it would work, but there's a lot of hurdles that does need to be overcome to make this happen.
Right. And Professor Yu, here in Korea, starting this week, rapid antigen tests, like you mentioned, conducted by medical practitioners, can serve as proof of infection. What do you advise amid this new testing strategy?
Well, before in Korea, yes, we can do self-tests or by the medical professional do the rapid antigen test. In case of positive, that time we have to show and we go to the PCR test. But from this Monday, the Korean government is like confirmed it's like COVID-19 positive. It's the same way. So professional rapid antigen test and the PCR. But there is one point. More than 60 years old who did the professional rapid antigen test can positive, that time is equal as like the PCR, you can receive the Paxlovid. But less than 60 years old who got it, the professional, the rapid antigen test positive, but who want to receive the Paxlovid, they have to do PCR again. So this point, generally in health, and there are not things to be serious cases, yes, better to do the rapid antigen test, even more than 60, doesn't matter the age, and then start to isolate it at home. But who are less than 60, but whose condition seems to be not good, and who has underlying disease like diabetes, high blood pressure, and other condition, better to immediately do the self-test and show them to do the PCR directly. That's better. So anyway, this is a little more convenient and more site we open for professional rapid antigen tests more. That's why we can found it, we can just check it out, amount of these waves going on, but don't forget about it. So self-test it at home, still not accepted. So please do at first at home, and if you have a symptom, please go to immediately for any clinic and nearby your home to ask it about professional rapid antigen test first, and then we'll see your report.
Right. Professor Yu, the interval between the first and second doses of the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines is being extended to 8 weeks from the current 3 to 4 weeks under the recommendation of the Global Health Body. Could you explain this extension for us?
Well, so this vaccination is very new. Before, we didn't have enough the cases to can report the safety and efficacies. So we thought like Pfizer, 3 weeks interval, and the Moderna, 4 weeks interval can be enough. But we found some issues. A couple of weeks before, U.S. Health Authority, they confirmed the messenger RNA type vaccine can cause carditis and heart issues. So they will calculate which interval was better for keep on efficacy and effectiveness, the same time less side effect. It's like a carditis. So they found that 8 weeks difference is much better, and so same with keep on their efficiency of the vaccination. This is the most important reason why. That's why from this month in Korea, also 5 to 11 years old, the vaccination will start. First announced was a 4 weeks interval. From now on, we can call 8 weeks interval from the 5 to 11 years old children vaccination we started in Korea.
Right, I see. And Professor Pang, I hear cases of the so-called Delta Crohn have also been detected over in the US. Could you tell us a bit about that?
So I think this Delta Crohn was raised by certain scientists because it had some characteristics of the Delta strain and some characteristics of the Omicron strain. And I say certain characteristics, it was certain genomic characteristics that resembled Delta strain and Omicron strain. So they gave this strain a name called Delta Crohn. So far, it's not a problem. It's less than 20 cases worldwide that's been reported. There's no evidence that it's more transmissible or more severe. I think the name is more scarier than the actual virus itself. And if you remember, and right now the strain that seems to be surging up is not the Delta Crohn, but the BA2 variant, so the little brother of Omicron. And so right now, no reason to be concerned. But what this pandemic has taught us is always be humble. And, so I think it is important to just keep a close eye on it. But for now, no hard data to suggest that this is a concerning variant.
Right. Professor Pang, you've mentioned the subvariant of Omicron quite a number of times on the show today. How worried should we be about that little brother of Omicron?
Yeah. So I think this incidence rate does seem to be going up in parts of Europe. The United States, we're monitoring our sewage data to look at the genetic materia of the SARS-CoV-2 virus. And we are seeing a small increase in certain states with this BA2 variant. So I think a surge will happen. What I don't know is how big the surge will be and how long it will last. My guess, it will not cause much problems, but because again, we have just better immunity in the population. So I think the surge will be there. People will get infected, but people will likely not get too sick from it, leading to more hospitalizations. And again, we are better prepared. We have a lot more treatment options, monoclonal antibodies, oral antiviral agents. We just know this disease better. So keeping an eye on that, not too concerned, but always humble. Yeah.
Right, of course. And speaking about being humble, of course, then, Professor, Delta Crohn has yet to be detected here in Korea. Do you suppose we need to better prepare for its presence in the near future?
Well, I 100% agree with the mention of Professor Pang, because Delta Crohn is we don't need to concern so much, because each different strain from Delta variant and Omicron variant, we found these characteristics in each virus, but kind of we can call chimera. This is a fantastic the monster. That's why the media can make exaggerated to the Delta Crohn is like a chimera, so serious is like Delta, spreading is like Omicron. But actually, what Professor Bang comments about it, we don't have enough evidence, and that there are more other issues for the spreading more fatalities. We don't have it. But yes, BA2, the little brother, I love this word, from the Omicron, stealth Omicron something. Yes, we have to prepare it. But anyway, this is now Korean government, we are waiting for the easing level of quarantine. So probably there are no way to prevent 100%. Only personal hygiene and wear mask properly and keep on social distancing at least March this year. This is only one way we can to preparing even the Delta Corona others variants.
Right. Now, Professor Pang, you mentioned that you do not know if there's going to be another variant, but given your understanding of COVID-19 thus far, what then are the chances of a new variant in the near future?
Yeah, so I do not know if there will be a variant that's going to be leading to more morbidity and mortality, meaning that will there be a variant? Yes, I think I'm 99% sure that there will be future variants. What I'm not sure is, will these variants will become more problematic? Will it lead to more sickness in the future? That I don't know. In the big scheme of things, viruses tend to mutate to be less virulent but more transmissible, because it makes sense for the virus. You don't want the virus to become more and more deadly, because then the virus will just kill off its host, and that will lead to a decline in its transmissibility, because the host will just not be alive to transmit the virus. So in the big scheme of things, I think the variants will continue to emerge. I don't know if it'll become more and more aggressive, but my guess is it'll be less and less aggressive, maybe a little bit more transmissible. But with the immunity that we have in our population, my guess is it'll become less and less problematic, and it'll start becoming like your normal cold virus. Yeah.
Right, and hopefully your outlook will be accurate. All right, Professor Pang, as always, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts. Professor, you here in the studio, thank you very much for your insights. Right, well, that is all the time we have for this Wednesday's edition of the Daily Report. Thank you for watching. See you on Thursday.
When the lantern of